morning, sir.
Good morning. How are you? Good.
All right. Good
to see you.
So the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard defamation trial is underway in Virginia. And let me tell you, there have been some pretty explosive claims so far from both of the Hollywood stars. Depp's lawyers are accusing his ex-wife, Heard, of fabricating domestic violence claims against him in order to advance her own career. And he's suing her for $50 million. And it apparently got ugly after an op-ed she wrote that was published in the Washington Post back in 2018. So he's alleging that she devastated his career when she revived her allegations against him in this article. But keep in mind, she never actually mentioned his name in it.
No one had ever, in 5 decades, no one had ever accused Johnny Depp of being abusive of any kind with a woman. That's why it was such a jolt. He had been in other long-term relationships, as I said. He had 2 children. And no one had even suggested ever that he was capable of something like this. By choosing to lie about her husband for her own personal benefit, Amber Heard forever changed Mr. Depp's life and reputation. And you will hear him tell you the dreadful impact that it has had on his life. The evidence you will hear at this trial contradicts the story Ms. Heard presented to the world in May 2016 and again in December 2018. The evidence will show that the last time Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard saw each other before Ms. Heard showed up in court on May 27, 2016, was May 21st. And that's a very important date.
Meanwhile, Heard's attorneys are arguing that her allegations are entirely true and that she had a First Amendment right to express her views.
What he does is he takes 8 to 10 tablets of ecstasy almost immediately. And the next 3 days are just a cycle of very, very, very violent activity by him. Amber keeps trying to calm him down. She tries to get him to eat. She tries to get him to sleep. She tries to do these things. And he would just, he was, at times delusional, paranoid. He would be, mad at somebody else. Then he'd be mad at her. So as you go through those 3 days of Australia, some pretty horrendous things happen to her. He rips off her nightgown. He has her jammed up against a bar. He has hurled bottles and bottles at her. He has dragged her across the floor on the broken bottles and the liquor. He has punched her. He has kicked her. He tells her he's going to kill her. He hates her. He's pounding at her, pounding her, and then he penetrates her with a liquor bottle.
So Heard has filed a $100 million counterclaim against Depp. Her claim is that she's been defamed by being accused of fabricating a hoax. Now, the trial is expected to go on for around 6 weeks, and I have a feeling it's going to get much uglier. Join me now to discuss is criminal defense attorney and anchor at Law and Crime Network, Bob Bianchi. Bob, thank you so much for joining me. So, Bob, I had a feeling this was going to probably be uncomfortable to listen to, especially because it's related to domestic violence and everything else. And some of the what we heard from the attorneys, again, uncomfortable to hear. With that being said, what is your impression of the opening statements from these attorneys?
Well, the opening statements were good by both attorneys, but the question really becomes, in any case, Stephanie, what is the law and do the facts support the law? And with defamation cases for public figures, under the Sullivan standard by the United States Supreme Court all the way back to 1964, suing public figures is very, very difficult because you have to actually show actual malice or a reckless disregard for the truth. And this is your classic he said, she said scenario. They have 2 completely altering viewpoints about what occurred here. And then I want to just go to one piece that I think is very important. You mentioned it earlier in lead-in. She never even mentioned Depp in this article that she's being sued over. And in fact, part of the article, she says, like many women, I have been harassed and sexually assaulted by the time I was of college age, but I kept quiet. I did not expect filing complaints to bring justice. And then goes on to say that she's experienced the wrath of the community for being an advocate against sexual violence and domestic abuse. So I think Johnny Depp's side has a difficult factual issue as to whether or not she was even referring to him. The fact that people may infer that is not good enough, in my opinion. Secondly, she's clearly referring to other instances that have occurred in her life. And thirdly, she's talking about the reaction the public gave her for just being an advocate against sexual assault. So from that factual standpoint, I think it's going to be very difficult for Depp's team to win this case, especially when you lay on top of that the very high hurdle and burden legally under the Sullivan standard that has to be proved here. So what this is going to come down to, and we're covering it on Law and Crime Day to Day, and I'm kind of fascinated about it because it is just an old-fashioned 6-week mudslinging, everything about their lives, all the privacy, every permutation of their, everything about them, all the good, the bad, and mostly the ugly is going to be spewed out by both sides, airing their dirty laundry. And of course, paparazzi and all the media are all over it because of the nature of who they are. At the end, I don't think anybody wins in this case. It was, I think, a bad move to file lawsuits in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to further destroy their careers if they will, but maybe not. We'll see. But also Heard's attorney, so they said, okay, they didn't mention she didn't mention Depp in the Washington Post article. Okay. But now if she did mention him, she has a First Amendment right to do so. And her claims are true is what they're saying. So that would be her First Amendment right to talk about that if that really happened.
Well, yeah, I mean, we get confused with First Amendment rights, I think, sometimes. First of all, this is not a government entity that is trying to stop her or him from speaking in any way, shape, or form. But what they're saying is that there's freedom of speech, the freedom to be able to speak. And that is true. Of course, it's a cherished right. It's the First Amendment. It was #1 in our Bill of Rights for a reason, because of its importance. And the courts are very, very careful. Jealously guard is the term that many courts use, the First Amendment right. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be necessarily truthful. You don't have to always be accurate. And when you're a public figure, it gets back to that standpoint that the burden's even harder under the First Amendment to prove a libel or defamation case, because you have to prove that there was actually a reckless, at a minimum, a reckless disregard for the truth, or really, in reality, a lie that was known and told. So the First Amendment is an amazing shield against these lawsuits, making Depp's accusations in court even harder to prove.
Now, Johnny Depp's sister gave testimony. Let's take a look at that and we'll react after. Roll tape.
We, excuse me, we met for dinner a late dinner, and she was telling me that she and Johnny had a fight in Australia, and I was trying to talk to her about the idea that kind of fighting is not normal. It's too much, you know. It's not okay. But she told me that I needed to basically get down off my cross and mind my own business. She said that Johnny liked that she was feisty. You know, she was feisty, and then he loved it. And that Jerry Judge and I needed to stay out of her marriage.
What are your thoughts on her testimony and that specific sentence where she says Johnny Depp liked that Heard was, quote, feisty?
Yeah, you know, this sister's testimony was confusing to me. I think I put it in context of the opening statement where they're actually trying to show that Johnny Depp's mother and the sister who was just testifying was a very erratic and very volatile and physically abusive person to them as children, as well as the father who eventually left them. The substance of the sister's testimony was that Johnny Depp and her always agreed that they would never engage in an abusive relationship like the one they grew up in as children. So, I mean, I think that's the substance of what she said. And of course, now she's getting into, she's never seen any physical violence or anything of that nature, but kind of trying to, I think what the team is trying to do here is to say that Ms. Heard is very much like the mother, and that Johnny Depp would just walk away when the mother was abusive and violent, never hit the mother. He would just try to hide and get away from her. And that's the kind of persona that he is now encountering in Ms. Heard. And therefore, he would not, like he didn't with his mother, react in the way Heard indicates that that he did. I'm kind of surprised the judge allowed this kind of testimony in, but nevertheless, I think that's the theme.
Yeah, well, definitely interesting trial. We'll be keeping an eye on it over the next few weeks. Bob, thank you for your analysis. We appreciate it.
Of course.
Thanks. Coming up next.